Okay, my couture crafters, let's get into this nice holiday winter-esque scene. I found that the best inks to use for this particular background are the Marvy ink matchables. I think they're called matchables, Marvy matchables. They're the little ink pad right there. They are not the most expensive ink, but for this particular technique, and the Memento works good too, actually. But the other inks don't seem to want to behave on this particular glossy paper. The glossy paper that I'm using is by Ranger. It's just Ranger glossy paper. It's not the same as photo paper. Photo paper behaves differently with inks. Think about it. Photo papers are made to send through your inkjet printer and then dry immediately. Glossy paper has got some kind of clay coating or something or another on it that gives the ink's ability to glide across the top. So right now I don't have this sped up. It's real time and you're just watching me pull color, dab and pull, dab and pull. There's no special technique to this per se, at least not that I found at this time. All I'm doing is just pulling in the color. Now, if you want to deposit more color in an area, you just pat it. But for the most part, I'm just pulling the color into the sides. Now, the object of this game is to leave a little bit of white space down the center for this card where you want the highlight, where you want light to be, where you're trying to mimic light is what I'm trying to tell you guys. So we're just pulling, pulling, pulling. Again, this is the Marvy, M-A-R-V as in Victor Y, little inks. They are really inexpensive and you can use them to stamp with on glossy paper too. I originally bought these after seeing somebody stamp on glossy paper and do their techniques at the Carson Stamp Show. And it made me want them. And I think I got these ink pads for like $2 or $3 a piece. Very, very, very inexpensive. But I was watching a gentleman do this technique at the stamp show and I thought, well, since we're talking about blending right now, this would be a great time to try to blend with this technique as opposed to the Tim Holtz Ranger Foam swirling technique. This gives you kind of a streaky look. It's different. It lends itself really well to landscapes, I found. And I've tried this a couple of times thus far and I'm really, really pleased with the way that it's going. So next I'm going to dip into this darker blue color and I am tapping and pulling. Now you can see that this card is already super saturated with color. So it's not taking that blue color the way that it was taking that original light blue color. But it is still taking it. You can see that I'm still getting some dimension. I'm just doing a little bit more tapping here and pulling. But you still want to keep going because it does add a different dimension and a different layer that will peek through with your final product. So even though you don't see it too much, you can kind of see it more on there. Also, I'm using a paper towel to hold the paper so that I don't have fingerprints everywhere in there or fingerprints all on the ink everywhere transferred. It just works out a little bit better. I used 5 colors on this, black being the 5th color, and I used the black Memento at the end. So this one here is just a deeper blue color. And this one probably is one of my favorites because it's really showing through. I will link the ink pads that I used in the description bar because I can't think. I know one of them is, I think one of them is just like number 10. They come in numbers. I think I used 10, 3, I can't remember. But I'll have it down in the description bar for anybody who might want to try this technique with these. Or you might just have these around. I want to say this is probably a lot of people's first ink pads because they're so inexpensive. And if you see somebody playing with them, they really do come up quite vibrant and light. The ink seems to have a lighter consistency, not as heavy. And so you can really see through it, which works out really well for this particular technique. But again, just pulling through the color, leaving some areas darker, some areas lighter. Just playing, pulling and playing. In the notes, tell me how you guys have been enjoying the series. Tell me what you're looking forward to seeing during this series. Because right now, I feel like we're just getting into it, but at the same time, I'm like, I think we're halfway through it. Next, we're going to do embossing, and then we'll talk about turnabout stamps, and we'll do some masking, and then after that, I think we're about done with this series. I wanted to finish it halfway through the month of November so that we could start working on our Christmas cards if you found any that you liked, or your December daily, so on and so forth. So again, in the comment section, tell me how you've been enjoying it. Tell me if there's something else that you want me to cover that I haven't covered. But scene building was one of the things that we wanted to do. I just didn't know that I was going to incorporate scene building with blending, but why not? And earlier today, I dropped another video about blending with a brayer that people might like. It's a really easy technique that's also done on glossy paper. So here I am adding an even darker shade, and this is when the depth really starts to show. It's really starting to look like a night sky to me. For this one here, I'm doing a lot of patting and pulling. This is not a card that I think that I would mass produce, but I'm certainly enjoying, doing one or two. Matter of fact, I think I made 2 of this card. And again, it's really an enjoyable process, but it's not a fast process. This takes time to build up the color. So you're just going little by little and adding and blending. Here I'm going back to add a little depth to the middle and blend out something that probably had a little streak or something in there. But I really like the way that this has turned out. Now I'm grabbing my Misty here, and I'm dropping that magnet down there just to keep it in place. And I'm putting the trees down. This is a tree stamp from Stampscapes, and now I want to own all the Stampscapes stamps. I want them all, guys, like all of them. And I'm using Stays On ink. I like the Stays On ink because it dries immediately. I did this before with the VersaFine, and you just have to wait too long to go back over it and add your details and highlights if you want to do this properly. So for now, I'm just grabbing Stays On, which is a great ink for non-porous surfaces. So anything that's slick or slippery, you want to use Stays On. I inked up the stamp, and this came unmounted, and I'm looking at it, and I don't know if I got a good impression. I must have, because I'm cleaning it. I've got that glare from my light that's going above. But if I'm cleaning the stamp, that means that I must have gotten a good impression. So now I'm just taking little Mr. Deer, and I'm going to do the same thing and ink him up with some Stays On too. And the newer Stays Ons come in that little square, which looks just like the Marvy Matchables. I'm dabbing the bottoms of the tree and the deer so that it's not so stark, so that when I add my little white effect, I don't have to knock it back too much more. It's already looking like it's sitting in a fog, which I like. The original size of this card is 4 by 8.5. I ended up cutting it down to 4 by 8. That worked out better for my card size because I really didn't want to do a card larger than 4.5 by 8.5. That's just ludicrous. So here I'm darkening up the edges just a little bit to add just a little more depth and to balance it out just a little bit more. And I'm using Memento Tuxedo Black, which also can be used to Copic color with. Your alcohol markers are safe with this ink, which is one of the reasons why I really like it. Something else that I learned about Memento ink is that it's light fast. So it's probably one of the nicer inks that you can get. And they come in those little dewdrops, and I have a few. It's just not my favorite ink, but it is my favorite ink to alcohol ink with. So here I'm just going back and forth and blending out that darker spots just a little bit. And now I'm using my Hero Arts Unicorn White, and I'm just dabbing up and down at the bottoms of the trees and on the horizon line. The horizon line is where the sun line meets the land, I guess you can say. And I am just dabbing to make it look like it is foggy, like there's an atmosphere here. And this card was originally done by Kevin from Stampscapes. I am just duplicating it because it's so beautiful to me. Now with him, he has bleed proof ink by Dr. P.H. Martin's. I think it's Dr. P.H. Martin. I don't have that. So he's able to flick snow onto his card with a toothbrush. I don't have that right now. So I'm just using a Signo white gel pen to just go on ahead and give the illusion of stars and snow. So on the trees, I am drawing little lines which are supposed to mimic snow, and your eye is pretty forgiving, and so it's believing that it's snow and not these just random little lines that I'm drawing. I would like to have been able to paint these on, but I wasn't 100% sure how my acrylic paint would have behaved on top of all of this ink, if it would have sucked it up or if it would have stayed true white, so I just left it alone. So after doing my live video, we talked about putting a greeting on here as opposed to just leaving it blank. And the ladies were talking about do gold, do silver. Neither gold nor silver were really close to me, but what was close was rose gold. So I grabbed my rose gold ink. Here I'm prepping the surface to see if it's dry enough to be able to emboss on top of. And it turns out it is. I didn't have any of that embossing powder stick. So that was just a test run. I just poured the paper on there, and if it had stuck, it would have been fine because I could have just dusted it all off and heated up my surface. So I grabbed my Delicata rose gold ink pad. It's beautiful. Delicata makes the best metallics in my opinion. They're pigment, so they're really dewy and they don't dry quickly. And they will allow you to emboss over it. So I was surprised with how beautiful this came out, but I shouldn't have been surprised. They just make beautiful pigment inks. So I put that to the side, and now I'm getting ready to open up some powder. And I just poured it going that direction, not the other direction. I poured it going down away from the trees, because if you were to use VersaFine or something like that, all this powder would have stuck to the trees. And there is a dry paint brush that I'm using just to knock off any excess powder. I got a really good coverage with this and with the Delicata. I'm pleased with it. And I think this rose gold looks pretty. So now I'm taking my Wagner heat gun and I'm holding it perpendicular to the paper, and I'm just melting all of that powder. And I'm pleased with the results. This Wagner does get hot. It was my first time using it. I just replaced the Wagner. Well, I shouldn't say I replaced it with my other heat gun because I still have my other heat gun. But I do find that this Wagner gets hot and it melts the powder nicely. I didn't have any issues with it. So here I am cleaning off my stamp with baby wipes, and then to dry it off, I just run it back and forth on that scrubby. Why do I clean my stamp if I'm just going to stamp it on another card that's the exact same? When you are replacing because your cards are not the exact same size, you want to make sure you clean it, because if you were to place that stamp on there while it was dirty, it would have left you an impression. Clean your stamps if you are not doing cards that are the exact same. I wasn't sure if I was going to place this in the exact same spot, so I had to go ahead and clean my stamp in between. That is one of the best tips I can give you, is to clean your stamp between replacing it if your cards are not the exact same, if they're not identical. And these cards have slightly different lighting in different places and that kind of stuff. These are not identical cards. They're similar but not identical. So I had to replace that stamp, so I cleaned it. And I did the same thing. I used the Delicata pigment metallic ink pad, and here I am lighting up that powder, just melting it, embossing. So this will give you a melted, raised kind of feeling. Here's some of the new cardstock that I purchased from Alton Crafts. I love their glitter paper because it doesn't come off on your hands. And I use that rose gold to bring out the rose gold in the embossing. So now this is rose gold glitter paper. Super smooth. It just adds a little touch of elegance to your cards. I'm really pleased that I restocked on some of this. Now, I could have done the envelopes in rose gold, which would have made this very luxurious, but I was being cheap because I only have 3 sheets of that rose gold and I kind of want to hoard it. So instead, I just chose a blue cardstock, a blue navy cardstock. Oh, this is the card base. This isn't the bottom, but I would have liked, in theory, to have made the envelopes out of that rose gold, but nah, I was being cheap, like I said. So this is some navy cardstock. This is 65 pound weight. I could have used my snail runner to do this, but I didn't. Instead, I just used my glue because it was sitting there. And it gives you a little bit of wiggle room to make sure that you get the card lined up properly. This card measures 4.5 by 8.5. So the rose gold layer was cut at 4.25 by 8.25. I didn't like the way that was lined up, so I just took it off and lined it up again, and I like that much better. So again, this card totally measures 4.5 by 8.5. And here I'm cutting off a 4.25 by 8.25 piece for the inside. I'm using Nina Solar White 80-pound paper for that. When you are using lighter cardstock and you layer it with heavier weight cardstock, you'll notice that your paper will start to become more and more sturdy with the more layers that you put on there. So you really don't have to use 100-pound base weight if you don't want to. We prefer it, but you don't have to. You can use 65-pound, especially if you layer it with 80-pound or 100-pound on the inside. It'll definitely make your paper more sturdy. So for this, I grabbed one of my sentiments from Altenew, which are all of my holiday card sentiments. And I stamped it, but I didn't love the way that it came out. It was it just wasn't as crisp as I wanted it. And then I knew that I wanted a little deer to match the outside of the card, also on the inside of the card in the bottom right. I thought, well, it'll be cool if I stamp the deer in rose gold paper. So before stamping it on there, I stamped it off to the left. I got a perfect impression. When I stamped here, it's too much pressure, and I think I had the wrong backing in my MISTI at the time, and I couldn't get a decent image. So I said, I'll fix that. These are stamps that I mounted myself also. So I trimmed the deer, and then I stamped him. I trimmed the deer a little bit. I trimmed some of that excess rubber off that I wasn't going to need. And then I decided to stamp him again on a surface that I'm more comfortable with, hand stamping. So I just stamped him, put him on a little block, and stamped him in the corner using my Tim Holtz mat back there, and that was fine. And then I changed to VersaFine Nocturne ink, and that gave me the perfect impression with my sentiment. I still love Catherine Pooler just for different stuff, for different things. But yeah, this came out nice and crisp. And I just took a baby wipe, and I use Kirkland baby wipes because you can go to Costco and those baby wipes will last you a year, maybe 2. There's so many. So here I'm using my snail adhesive. I use the Tombow one you can get from Michael's or Joann's with the 3 replaceable cartridges. And that is my card. I just grabbed that glitter paper in there so that delicata can dry because it is pigment, so it's going to take a little bit longer to dry. And this is the second card, and I'm placing that down. And there we have it. We have 2 beautiful scenic background cards. All cards must have a matching envelope. These envelopes, again, I should have done it with the glitter paper. It's just what I should have done. It would have made it, again, more luxurious, a little bit fancier. However, I was being cheap. So I grabbed some navy blue cardstock. This is not as deep as the actual card base, but it's pretty dark. And I looked at my envelope template there to tell me where to cut the paper and where to score the paper. And it's a 4.5 by 8.5 card, so you just follow the instructions. I'm not 100% sure what these sizes were, but you guys have seen me do this a million times, and I'm sure by now you're probably pros at doing it yourselves, because I think everybody, if you're going to be a card maker, why not be able to make your own envelopes? Why not? You are not able to make this envelope out of a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. You must have a 12 by 12 for a card this big. And that tip comes right up to the fold of the other one, so I decided to round that tip. So I just put it back in there and rounded that tip so that, yep, it's just shy. And I use my art glitter glue, of course. The same way I always do, nothing special there. And I decided that I was trying to figure out how was I going to make this match. And I thought, you know what? Just a little deer in the corner would be perfect for this. I don't need to go overboard and start stamping trees and all that kind of stuff. If I were going to stamp the trees to try to make it match, I would have stamped it in white. So here I am rotating the platform around to make it face me. And see, this is what happens if you don't clean your stamp. I didn't clean my stamp. I just placed it down and picked it up. I knew that was going to happen, but I really didn't care. So then I inked it up and then I stamped the deer again, and I'm okay with that. And here I decided that's where I wanted the deer. I picked it up again. See, it left a ghost print. That's what happens when you don't clean your stamps. Just be ready for it. I inked it up again. I pushed it down, and I'm cool with that. That doesn't bother me not one bit. So I'm cleaning this platform and little stamp off with another baby wipe. And we are going to glue this down and hold it for a few seconds. I didn't round that tip. I wanted to see if it was going to catch, and it actually doesn't. And there we have it. 2 cards and a little deer. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I sure do appreciate it. And I will see you guys on the next run.